at Bayreuth. Thank you.
Thank you, and it gives us great pleasure to be here. And we thank this group, all the wonderful and interesting people that we've met, and the tremendously informative presentations that we've heard this week. And we're also grateful for this beautiful but chilly week in South Carolina, our first trip here. So our work as Bayreuth, as Bardo, actually started with a note of gratitude to Christoph Schlingensief. We attended a performance in 2006, and we really felt that transformative feeling that one learns about, one expects from a performance of Parsifal. And amidst a furor of terribly negative reception of this performance, we felt compelled to reach out personally to him, something we had never done before. But we wanted to express our gratitude and our appreciation for what he had accomplished through this production. And we did, through the internet, send him a note. And that really began what you'll now see is a series of our own works with this information. So we came as members of an audience. We initially wrote a very brief article called The Appreciation of the Schlingensief Parsifal, which was published by the London Wagner Society. And we expanded that to the Requiem for the Parsifal, which we sent to the producer himself, and Schlingensief put it on his own website, and we were very grateful for that. We felt in retrospect that the use of the word Requiem was kind of eerily prophetic, because, you know, he died a few years later. He had also applied the word Requiem to himself 1 year later, in 2008, when he was diagnosed with lung cancer, and he had hoped to survive. And he actually wrote a piece called The Requiem for an Undead Person, which is how he described himself at the time. So I'll be presenting very briefly about Wagner and Buddhism, and a little bit more about Christoph Schlingensief. I was thinking to say that the heart of this presentation is Ed's dramaturgical analysis, but I realize the term of art this week has been meat. So Ed will be presenting the meat of this presentation, as well as a few words on the legacy of Schlingensief. So we know that Wagner absorbed principles of Buddhism through his reading of Schopenhauer, specifically on the negation of the will and the relativity of the perceptual world. Thereafter, he read what was available to him in the French and German languages, and this included actually the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. Thereafter, we see evidence of the Buddhist influence in his various works, including Die Sieger. The word Schmerzen is very interesting because it is very close to the notion of the Buddhist or the Sanskrit term samsara. The wheel of samsara refers to the constant pain of reincarnation and living in the body. Tristan and Isolde deals with the blurring of both natural and interpersonal boundaries. Die Meistersinger deals with Wahn, and The Ring deals with the futility over a power struggle. Parsifal deals with many Buddhist applications, including the negation of the will, sensual renunciation as the key to enlightenment, the transmigration of souls. And you'll hear me say, and you'll hear Ed say a lot about this, because this is actually what is considered the work of the Bardo, and the term of art is metempsychosis of all sentient beings. The relativity of time and space, the use of parallel or alternative universes and realities, and finally, the acceptance of and the compassion for all sentient beings. Now a few terms from Buddhism and Sanskrit that you'll hear us talk during this presentation. Veda refers to the sacred Sanskrit spiritual text of the ancient people of the Indus Valley, and Wagner's term, Hinduism and Buddhism were referred to as the Indian religions. Bardo is where we'll be in this presentation, and it's a transitional zone of heightened awareness of a specific task that's being done in a specific space-time element. What takes place in the Bardo is spiritual trial and integration. The theory is that if you can accomplish what needs to be done in that place-time, then you will move on, perhaps from a lower space in the Bardo to a higher space in the Bardo. If not, you may have to reincarnate and do it all over again. Chakra is a popular word now, which is the Sanskrit word for wheel, and it represents energy centers in the body, bearing in mind that in Eastern thought, physical, mental, spiritual, and emotional are all packaged into the body. They're not torn apart as we tend to do in Western thinking. So I will spend a moment with this diagram because this is really a blueprint for how a Buddhist or Buddhist theory would see the human body. I believe it's a blueprint for how Schlingensief organized his Parsifal. I think he had this in mind. And I also felt that it had great predictive value as we were watching the performance, because once you knew where you were on this scheme, then you knew what was coming next. So if you look at the vertical axis from up to down or down to up, what you have at the bottom is pure physicality. The root chakra stands for absolute physicality, embodiment, survival. If you don't get past that, the rest will never happen. The crown chakra at the top is pure spirituality. So we have in this journey of life, and also in this journey through the Bardo, a journey from pure physicality and the struggles that involves to pure surrender to spirituality. Everything that happens in between has another lotus along the horizontal axes. And to briefly summarize, the sacral and the solar plexus areas are contained within the abdominal cavity, and these are what Freud would have called the id. These are the sexual and aggressive impulses that have to be integrated during life, and in this production have to be integrated during the Bardo as well. If you can imagine passing through an imaginary line, which is actually a real line because we all have a muscular diaphragm in our bodies, if you pass through that, you then are in the higher human functions and also the higher worlds of the Bardo. So the heart becomes the seat of love and compassion. The throat becomes the seat of personal truth. What is my life? What is this life about? What am I to accomplish here? The two forehead chakras become the seat of the brain, of mental functioning, intelligence, intuition, and finally of wisdom. And finally, the crown, which I've mentioned, is the seat of spirituality, whatever one's spirituality is. And presumably at death, and certainly in the Bardo, this is the area of the body in which surrender to spirituality and eventually to nirvana occurs. Nirvana is the goal of all souls, and it's marked by perfect compassion for all sentient life. And I use the word all sentient life because this was a particular focus of the Schlingensief Parsifal. You're all familiar, I think you've heard about the hair, and we'll describe that as we go along. But that was an example of sentient life other than our human life. Transmigration is the work of the soul, and actually this will comprise much of what Ed will be talking about. It conveys that the Bardo is an active place where an individual is forced to do the work that one didn't accomplish in the embodied life. So it is not a passive purgatory where sins can be passively burned off and make one ready for heaven. This is a place of hard work, and it was really captured in this production of Parsifal. Energetic bodies could best be thought of manifestations of these aspects of the soul as depicted in the chakra diagram, and these are used in the opera as well. Moving on to the performance itself, we want to point out that the dramaturg Karl Hegemann worked alongside with Christoph Schlingensief, and that he is also continues to be active in Bayreuth. Now, a few words about Schlingensief. There are no few words to describe him, but of the words that I have here, the ones that stick out in my mind are those of social provocateur. It seemed that this great artistic leader was constantly challenging audiences around the country and around the world. He had a career of truly Wagnerian breadth. His biographer, Tara Forrest, wrote that his work encouraged the audience to think critically and creatively about issues like immigration, unemployment, homelessness, and the rights of the disabled, and the Nazi legacy in contemporary Germany. His milestones are too numerous to review in great detail, but what I will say is that on German art television last summer, I was able to see clips from Talk 2000, Freakstars 3000, and The Church of Fear. And what is very interesting is that Schlingensief walks his talk. In these various productions, he created a community for disenfranchised people, not only where they could hang out together, but where they could realize their dreams, their desires to perform in front of an audience, just like people on the stage of Bayreuth. And in fact, I felt that I had recognized some of the people I was seeing on the TV screen who were supers in the Parsifal production. Amazing. Finally, we know that the Parsifal came toward the end of his life, and at the very end of his life, he sought to form what could best be described as a modern Asclepion, where he wanted to combine the efforts toward health via the arts, and he had at least broken ground on an infirmary complex in Burkina Faso, Africa. And if you look at the back of your program, you'll see a picture of it. I'm so glad that it's here. Now, key elements in this particular production are very important. Everyone on the stage is dead. We are looking in the Bardo. All characters are engaged in this process of metempsychosis, of transitioning through various levels of the Bardo. The Tibetan Book of the Dead is a good place if you want to learn more about this, because it describes the stages of the Bardo in great detail. In this production, the chakras are organized into 3 major groups, correlated with anatomy, 1 per act. The director uses parallel universes and doppelganger as ways of getting this point across. There is constant alternation and integration of light and dark forces coming from the early Sanskrit notions of peaceful and wrathful deities. These are played out in the characters, and Ed will show you pictures of that. Cosmos as continuum is a very Buddhist notion, and I do believe that was the purpose of the decomposing hair. It is to show us that we are part of that cosmos as continuum. Reminded me very much of the Catholic notion of Ash Wednesday, remember man that you are dust, and unto dust you shall return. I do think that was the purpose of the hair, although I have to say that as we looked at people around us in the audience, there were such visceral reactions to this that we watched them fainting and vomiting. That's just how powerful these Buddhist notions were played out in this production. The three acts of Parsifal can now be seen as three great way stations of Parsifal's progress through the Bardo. What was wonderful about what Schlingensief did is that he combined Western symbols that the audience could understand with the introduction of the Eastern symbols. Briefly, the lotus blossom as a symbol for rebirth, the hare, as I've mentioned, as a symbol of hope for rebirth. The pregnant Mother Earth goddess is the Grail, and you'll see a picture of a statue on her back and blood emanating from the womb of the statue, and the blood is the symbol of life in this performance. Red bouquets are the symbol of death, and the womb of Amfortas is also a symbol of death. And I think I will hand it over to Edward Bortnichak.
Thank you. Take your mic. Can you hear me okay? Sound all right? Yeah? Well, you'll forgive me if I move around a little bit during my presentation. My wife reminded me last night that I'm no longer the younger Siegfried that, for instance, Professor Vazsonyi, Professor Mungen is. And if I do a lot of leaning down over my paper, you'll see some headshots that will not be too flattering. There's not too much up on top there any longer. That's the only laugh that you're going to get during my part of the presentation. The Schlingensief production, as I think Paula has very well laid out, is deadly serious business, with the emphasis on deadly, which explains much of the audience's reaction to it. What I'd like to do before going to the first slide and stepping you through the production is, first of all, in the interest of time, I'm going to assume that we all know the broad outlines, the details of the story. So I'm going to be very selective as to how I speak about the opera. I will go act by act, but I will not laboriously go through it scene, really image by image. Secondly, the production as experienced in the theater was a bombardment of images. And actually, if you look at the Tibetan Book of the Dead, that is the way the Bardo, or the death Bardo, is described. There are many Bardos. The transitional zone between sleep and wakefulness is another, for instance. The near-death experience is the closest in the West that we come to understanding transitional zone. But the death Bardo, specifically in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, is described as a land or as a space of tremendous confusion, complexity, bombardment of images that one needs to be guided through. Therefore, the editing of showing images from this position, from this production, is not an easy task, and I take full responsibility and blame if I'm not showing the images that really do it justice. I certainly hope that I do. In the course of this dramaturgical analysis, I plan to convince you of three things. You may want to keep this in mind to decide for yourself about this production if you've not already seen it. First, I want to convince you of Schlingensief's complete faithfulness to the composer's intentions in producing a comprehensive healing work. Schlingensief may not have been a traditional Wagnerite, but to steal some words from Shaw, he certainly was a perfect one. Secondly, I hope to convince you of the clarity and ultimately of the simplicity of the concept, although its expression in the theater was certainly not simple and not easy on the audience. But then again, when was Wagner ever trying to be easy on the audience? And third, finally, I hope to give you a sampling by editing of the still photography from this, since there are no motion pictures except those that were made by the theater for its own personal use, for its own study purposes, of the power of the images used and the power of the emotions generated by those images on an audience. So let's turn first to an overview of Act 1. What I'm going to highlight are just the concepts first that figure prominently throughout this entire act. First, it's important to note that you are remembering what Paula said about the mapping of the body, the energy zones of the body. In the first act, we are in the heart chakra zone. It's the world of emotions and love, essentially Montsalvat, as seen as the land of the peaceful deities. It's a stage replete with heart images. Again, remember everyone on stage, the three principles, the triad of principles, Kundry, Parsifal, Amfortas, are dead. The drama is seen from the perspective of the recently deceased Parsifal in the Bardo. He has just entered the Bardo as the opera opens. All characters are souls of the dead related to this index soul, that is Parsifal, at various stages of integration within the Bardo, and they all have their Bardo work to do. And last, Gurnemans, the character that is perhaps so significant, particularly in this first act, and appears, of course, at the very beginning of the act, is Parsifal and our Bardo guide, probably very significantly in this production, as it would be in any Wagnerian production, though, that he appears so early in the opera, because indeed he will step us through, as he does the other characters, through the Bardo. He is a representation, broadly, of what a Buddhist would refer to as a whole set of deities called the peaceful deities, the benevolent figures. So Act 1, Scene 1, the high points of this I think you have to take away in understanding the production, and after I show this in the next slide, I'll show you screenshots of Act 1. The physical body is seen as a prison compound, the flesh as a mortal prison of the soul. Secondly, there is a primitive tribal setting which underscores the universal basics of human life. Now, there is much confusion about this. There's a Joseph Conrad Heart of Darkness sense to the entire production in terms of the primitive tribal images. I think that we can get too carried away with that. I think the only thing that Christoph Schlingensief was trying to do with those images is get us back to the basics, life and death. Kalahari Bushman, for instance, wouldn't have the argument that we have in the United States around the Terry Schiavo case. Where does life begin, where does life end, that we continue to have in bioethical circles. They have a sense of, when they see it, they know it. I believe that what the production is trying to do is get us back to the basics, focus on what's really important. The live caged hair represents hope, and there's also a variety of impressionistic sculptures of the hair, so the sense of hope, as it is musically in the opera and dramatically all through the text in this production, is always somewhere present if you look for it. The hair is the totem animal of the tribe, essentially. And if you think about it, the procreative power of the hair really symbolizes the hope of survival, the promise of survival for the species. To a Buddhist in death, what the hair would symbolize is the hope, so to speak, of the soul for its essential, for its ultimate merging with the cosmos, which is nirvana. Parsifal is in search of the souls of his mother and father to resolve conflicts from his past life, his mother and father being dead. Kundry is the restless reincarnated soul of the mother, appearing as a projection of Parsifal's collected and conflicting memories of that mother. And Amfortas is the agitated soul of the recently dead father at an early stage of cycling through the Bardo. Representation of Parsifal's projections of emotions towards his father is what is represented in the figure of Amfortas. Amfortas, importantly, does not accept his own death in this first act, and indeed throughout the opera until the very end. Scene 2 of Act 1, I should say also, as Paula was saying, red bouquets, floral bouquets, the wound is external. So the wound is death, and he carries it about as a red bouquet initially, held outside of his body, and that's significant. Act 1, Scene 2, we have the first Grail Temple scene as the metaphysical reenactment of Amfortas' funeral, witnessed by the soul of Parsifal in horror at the realization of his father's spiritual torment. The Grail Knights, this is the kinship of the dead through all times and places, showed by a myriad of period costumes. The community of the peaceful dead are welcoming the new soul, or attempting to welcome the new soul, by ritually anointing him with bloodied hands, dipped in the eternal womb of creation of the Grail Earth Mother. It is the love feast of the peaceful dead. The troubled soul of Amfortas cannot partake in the ritual, as he is stuck in place in the Bardo and does not accept his death. At the conclusion, Gurnemans will point the way for the soul of Parsifal to pass through the prison of his physical world and into the next station of the Bardo to confront the central conflict of his former existence. So we have a laser pointer. I'll point some things out, but if we don't, I will try to do my best just to draw your attention where they are in the picture. I don't see a laser pointer, but we'll make do. What we see in this first image from the first act, the progression of the Grail Hall, the progression to the Grail Hall, the slightly Arabic figures in the background. You can see the mortal coil, essentially, the barbed wire, the prison of the soul. This is an image of a peaceful deity from the very benevolent look on its face from the Tibetan Book of the Dead. The heart chakras, in the interest of time, I'll just point out the heart figures and other primitive figures in this particular scene. I think that's all we need to say about that. Here we have the Earth Mother Goddess as Grail, a tribal figure, a well-endowed tribal female form. And here we have what Paula described as actually a statue from the Isle of Malta. And we have the Earth Mother Goddess hovering to the right of it, Amfortas, on the left. You can see it's a decapitated head. So you're looking at from the decapitation point of the head in the back of the womb, and it's there that they would dip their hands to extract the menstrual blood for the consecration ceremony. Parsifal in white garb shroud, Amfortas, Parsifal, and Kundry throughout this production in shrouds. They are dead. This is an image of the Willendorf Venus, one of the oldest figures of the female form as Earth Goddess known, about 27,000 years old, and you can see the similarity to the actual figure on stage in the production, Parsifal with the imprinted bloody hands. Act 2, very quickly, the overview. This is an absolutely, of course, essential act. It is the crux of the opera. And it presents here the central conflict of the hero, which is the Oedipal conflict, the Oedipal complex. There is a well-established concordance between Buddhist spiritual concepts and psychoanalytic principles. Indeed, Freud is much easier to reconcile with Buddhist principles than he is with Christian doctrine. The chakras of the pelvis and the sexual organs predominate throughout this act. The illusion of desire is a basis of the human interaction and resultant threat of imbalance of light forces. So as one of the forces of life that needs to be integrated. Klingzor. The introduction of Klingzor here is the representation of the wrathful deities tempting the soul. Klingzor's flower garden is the realm of temptation of the flesh. Klingzor will be continually seen in the opera. He does not disappear after his first appearance. Now, Klingzor, a word about Klingzor, I'm probably out of time, but if you'll bear with me another few moments. Klingzor is neither good nor evil. He's like sex. He's an attribute or a human condition that needs to be integrated. It's parallel to Gurnemann as the alternative Bardo guide, and he often in this production is seen with Gurnemanns throughout the rest of the production, alternatively leading the soul through the Bardo journey. The graffiti on stage simply reminds us of the continuum of life. In the pivotal second scene of the second act, Flower Maiden sequence, I'll skip right down to what is really, really important, the kiss sequence. In the kiss sequence, we have the incest, either imagined or real, between the mother Kundry and the son Parsifal, as the horrified father Amfortas looks on. It's the universal taboo as the centerpiece of the emotional conflict of the hero. Amfortas, die Wunde, the outburst of Parsifal, as his self-reproach at the Oedipal sin, followed by the unsuccessful attempt to reconcile the parents by joining them with bloodied, outstretched hands, which in this production is trying to incorporate one into the peacefulness of the Bardo. At Kundry's outburst of Unlache, the constantly rotating complex stage platform suddenly stops, isolating her completely at the side of the stage in a resting moment. And at the conclusion, Klingzor and Parsifal are finally both able to touch Kundry with their bloodied hands and halt her agitated recycling. The Haitian devil, we learned from Carl Hegemann, was the model for Klingzor, a wrathful, threatening figure. This is an example of wrathful deity as pictured in Tibetan Book of the Dead. Klingzor in the production, again, Kundry, you can see in shrouds, again, dead. I'm giving you two visions of the beginning of Act Two. This production changed every year, quite remarkably, as the producers, the directors saw the production. The image of the hair, you can see in the globes at the top. You can see the confused stage, which is a representation of the complex space of the Bardo. The same scene, roughly, in the next year of the production, 2006. The flower maidens, tribal shades, tribal figures of women. And here we have Kundry being stopped in time and place, as I described, as this gigantic animatograph, this circling complex stage stops for a moment at Unlache. This is the moment of incest, Amfortas looking on, and the sexual act. You can't see it well, but Parsifal is actually sitting up in his coffin. Indeed, this act is a reenactment of Parsifal's funeral. Act 3, very quickly in overview, now we enter the highest level of chakra integration, the realm of the intellect, the head crown chakra, as Paula had described. We have a wedding pantomime amidst an art graveyard midway in the act, representing now the integration of the heart, the wedding, and the intellect. Okay. Here, Gurnemanz and Klingzor unite as Bardo guides, and we have the resolution of the work in the Bardo, the reconciliation of the triad principles in the Good Friday Meadow, Kundry's Act 2 kiss of sexual passions transformed into the maternal kiss of peace, child's play on a seesaw during Gurnemanz's narrative on the spring, Du siehst, das ist nicht so, the final image, the Parsifal Kundry Amfortas triad, all shrouded in white, circle a maypole. The final scene of the opera, we have, again, go very much just to the very end, Amfortas accepting his death, Parsifal alone on stage in 2005 and 2007, walking into the eternal white light of nirvana as the curtain closes and light envelops the audience. The Bardo journey is complete. And to show you quickly, the lotus image you can see very significantly there, the symbol of rebirth. Here, the art graveyard. Here we have the remarkable seesaw image. You can see the handicapped supernumerary appearing with Parsifal. With Christoph Schlingensief, all of humanity is concentrated in this production. He makes very, very sure that we understand this is about every man's journey. Here we have the circling of the maypole, which is really, in this case, a shepherd's staff. Here we have the external wound still, Parsifal, rather Amfortas, gazing into his own grave at this point. And here we have the healing again with the shepherd's staff of Amfortas, which is the burial of Amfortas. And finally, the white light of nirvana as Parsifal enters it, this scene taken from 2004. You can see the barbed wire parting, the set becoming much simpler. Finally, just a word, Christoph Schlingensief certainly saw Bayreuth as Werkstatt. The production simplified and clarified over the years. There were less allusions to the chakra, more clues that we're in Buddhist terrain and that this was a Buddhist interpretation. Let me say the heritage of this is that we think it stands with Wieland Wagner's famous 51 production as a classic. This is the first full expression we're aware of the Buddhist core of the opera. It restores it to being a healing, integrative work, not a narrow Christian or elitist or a racist piece of art. It leads to other things. In particular, it leads to the ongoing trend at Bayreuth of bioethical interpretations Images of the body and bioethical interpretations at Bayreuth is, we could go on and on into another paper, and actually we do in other formats. Picture credits from the Bayreuth Festival and Christoph Schlingensief's website, and we thank Alexander at Bortnichak for his technical help in putting this together in terms of the editing. Thank you.
Thank you both very much. I'm afraid the time having run over, I've been instructed to keep us very much to the schedule. We're really not going to have any time for any questions now, but during the coffee break, I suggest if people have any questions for Ed and Paula, they should do so then and over lunch and during the rest of the time. But because the next session needs to start at 11:15, I'm afraid there simply isn't any time now. So if we could be back to start sharply at 11:15.